Hello, and welcome to Understanding Course Placement, brought to you by the Scottsdale Community College Testing Center. My name is Elliot Alvarado. Our goal for this presentation is to provide you with a better understanding of the placement process. Where does placement fall in the enrollment process? It is actually step 2. However, one of the most frequent misconceptions we experience among students is that as a new student, you must take a placement assessment. That is not always the case. You may not have to take a placement assessment if you meet the requirements for additional placement options, or what is referred to as multiple measures, which we will look at during the next few slides. For your reference, we have provided the link to access the Getting Started page on the SCC website. What does multiple measures mean? As stated in the previous slide, multiple measures are additional options students can use for course placement. Here is a list of the multiple measures accepted by SCC: high school transcripts, SAT scores, ACT scores, and GED scores. Students only need to use one of the listed multiple measures, but can choose to use more than one if they want. Students can submit their score reports online, which we will show you how to do towards the end of the presentation. Students who decide to use multiple measures must meet specific requirements depending on the multiple measure they use. It is when students do not meet the requirements for any of the multiple measures that they are then required to take their placement assessments. Now we will look at each multiple measure and their requirements in greater detail. High school transcripts. Students using high school transcripts for placement must ensure the following: the student has completed at least 2 years of high school coursework within the last 10 years, verified by an unofficial high school transcript listing a 2.6 or higher unweighted cumulative GPA. High school transcripts that are more than 10 years old may be used for placement into English and reading courses. The 10-year limit still applies, however, for math placement. Requirements for students using their ACT and/or SAT test scores. Students must ensure the following. Students using their ACT scores must ensure that they have a score of an 18 or higher in each of the subject areas, which are English, reading, and math. ACT scores are valid for 5 years. SAT scores. Students using their SAT scores for placement must ensure the following. For the math placement score, there are 2 versions of the SAT that are accepted. The old version, which are SATs taken prior to 2016, and the new version, which are SATs taken at 2016 and after. Students using math placement using their SAT scores must ensure that if using the old version, they have a score of a 470 or higher. For the new version, students must ensure that they have a score of a 510 or higher. English and reading placement using the SAT scores, students must ensure that in the writing reading SAT score section that they have a score for the old version of an 820 or higher. And if using the new version, students have a score of a 460 or higher. Students using a GED score for placement. The final placement measure that is accepted by SCC is the General Educational Development, or GED scores. In order for students to place, they must have a GED score of a 165 or higher in both the math and reasoning through language arts sections. GED scores, similar to SAT and ACT scores, are valid for 5 years. Where do you submit your scores? We're going to look, now that we've looked at the different multiple measures that students can submit to SCC, let's take a look at where students can submit their score reports. Students can submit their multiple measure score reports at maricopa.edu/placement. If students are attempting to submit transcripts for transfer credits for reasons other than placement, we recommend speaking with admissions and records. Now we've talked about multiple measures. Now we're going to talk about taking your placement assessments through EdReady. And joining me is my colleague Phil Russell, who will explain more about online placement through EdReady.
Thank you for the introduction, Elliot, and thank you for the informative presentation regarding multiple measures. Next, we will take a look at the EdReady Placement Assessment tool. As stated earlier, if you don't meet the needed requirements for any of the multiple measures we have discussed, then students will need to take their placement assessments using the EdReady tool. When using EdReady, we ask that students make sure they use the maricopa.edready.org website to take their assessment. We want to stress, do not use any other EdReady site, as this can result in your scores not being recorded accurately or having your enrollment process delayed. Here is some additional information about EdReady. EdReady provides students with the convenience and flexibility. To take the assessment, students will need to create an EdReady account if they have not done so previously. Students will be asked to provide their MEID so that test scores can be accurately recorded into their student account. Students who are unsure of their MEID can always contact the SAC Help Desk at 480-423-6274 and select option 3 for assistance. In addition, there is a student quick start guide designed to walk students through setting up their EdReady account and how to access the placement assessments. The link for that quick start guide is listed below, or it can be accessed by finding the PDF version on the SEC testing website. So, how does the EdReady placement assessment work? Once students have created their EdReady account, new students, if required to take their placement assessments, will take all 3 sections of reading, math, and English. Students will first take a diagnostic for each assessment and will receive a diagnostic baseline score. Students then have the option to work on the provided non-proctored learning modules to increase their baseline score as much as possible until they reach their score of 100. Students may then determine their placement based on the current placement chart. For example, a student takes one of the math assessments and receives the initial assessment score of 60. That student can better their score and work on their learning modules as often as they like to better their score until they reach their goal score, or they can score 100 on that assessment. The EdReady Placement Assessment contains 3 specific testing sections. Once again, math, English, and reading. The math portion of the assessment has 2 different areas, which are the quantitative reasoning, algebra, and statistics assessment, and the other is the college algebra assessment. The reading portion also contains 2 different assessments, which we will discuss in the next slide. As mentioned in the previous slide, the reading subject area contains 2 separate assessments. The first is college reading, and the second is critical reading, critical thinking. New students who need to complete their reading placement assessments can choose to take one or both of the reading assessments. However, we do recommend taking the college reading placement assessment first. Students who score 95 or higher may take the critical reading and critical thinking placement assessment. But again, this is a recommendation. Students can still choose which reading assessment they want to take. Students who take the critical reading critical thinking placement assessment can place into CRE 101 or place reading exempt. In order to place reading exempt, students must score a 95 or above on the critical reading critical thinking placement assessment. Similar to reading, the math section also has 2 available placement assessments: quantitative reasoning algebra and statistics, and college algebra. Students are required to take one of the math placement assessments. Students may choose to take either placement assessment based on their knowledge of math. The quantitative reasoning algebra and statistics placement assessment can be viewed as focusing more on the foundational level math problems compared to the college algebra placement assessment, which is designed for students who have a solid understanding of math. Lastly, here is some advice from us, the proctors. Don't wait. Get on the ball to request your transcripts to determine your placement, or take your EdReady placement assessments ahead of time so your academic advisors have this information to determine your placement in your English, math, and reading coursework. Refer to the SEC placement chart. Use this tool to set some goals for the scores you want to achieve on each of the placement assessments. As a reminder, this is a placement diagnostic assessment. Don't view the EdReady assessment as a pass or fail situation. If you have questions, visit the SCC Testing Center website, which provides tutorial videos to help you guide you through the placement process. Additionally, if you have questions, you can ask us. We are here to help. To wrap things up, I'm going to go ahead and return the presentation back to Elliot to go ahead and review some last-minute details. Back to you, Elliot.
Thanks, Phil. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at each one of the resources that were provided in the presentation, starting with determining placement options and clicking on the Getting Started link. The Future Students and Getting Started page will provide you with information on tuition, degrees and certificates, and faculty. As a new student, what you can do is click on the Future Students tab, and in the drop-down, click on Enrollment Steps. The next page you'll be taken to will provide you with the steps in enrollment. For this presentation, you'd like to select on Step 2, Determine Placement Options. The plus sign, clicking on that, will provide a drop-down, and the information provided will be what we've seen already in this presentation. Information on multiple measures, as well as taking your placement assessments through EdReady. And you can also click on the hyperlink providing you with the placement chart for students to see what multiple measures, or if they're using placement assessments, what courses that'll place you into. Next, we're going to look at the web link where you can submit your transcripts and your score reports. On the transcript and score report submission page, this is where you'll find the information on where to submit transcripts and score reports. On the left-hand side, you'll see the measures. That's the specific multiple measure you'd like to use, listing the high school GPA, ACT, SAT, GED scores, ACCUPLACER, and your EdReady scores. Additionally, a new feature has been added with an information caption pop-up that will help expedite the process and specifically address the areas you're looking that you may have questions in. To submit your score report or transcripts, you'll click on the blue hyperlink where it says Here, depending on which multiple measure you're using. The next resource we're going to look at is the EdReady Student Quick Guide. This information will provide you with the how-to tutorial on setting up and taking your EdReady placement assessments. The next resource we're going to look at is the Placement Coach tool, which we didn't speak too much about during the presentation, but is a very valuable resource. The Placement Coach tool allows students to determine their placement based on which multiple measure or EdReady score that they want to use. Additionally, there is the informational pop-up menu so that students can ask direct questions or figure out specific areas that they're looking at through this pop-up. What students will do is click on whatever multiple measure or placement assessment option they're using, and the Placement Coach tool will provide a tentative placement. Please keep in mind that the recommendations for placement are based off the district placement chart, not SCC's placement chart. So there may be courses that students are placed into using the Placement Coach that aren't offered at Scottsdale Community College. For those purposes, we'd recommend speaking with your advisor. And lastly, we'll look at the SCC Testing Center website. The Testing Center website will provide you with an overview of the information we've discussed in this presentation, multiple measures, EdReady, as well as informational videos and tutorials on walking you through course placement and EdReady. So you've heard a lot about placement in the enrollment steps. If you have any questions regarding placement, please feel free to contact the Scottsdale Community College Testing Center staff, Linda Bridwell, Elliot Alvarado, and Philip Russell. Below you can find our contact information, testing@scottsdalecc.edu, or you can contact us by phone, 480-423-6433. 833. Additionally, if you're ready to enroll at Scottsdale Community College, we provided a link that students can use to contact or request an Enrollment Navigator. An Enrollment Navigator is a specialist who can help you easily navigate through the enrollment process. Thank you. We appreciate your time, and good luck on your academic journey.